It's Thunder Thursday. I'm Adam Kemp, the web editor of News OK Sports, filling in for Eric Horn today. I'm joined by columnist Jenny Carlson and Thunder writer Brett Dawson, and we are talking NBA draft. Guys, how you feeling?
Uncertain.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say.
I feel like whatever we say right now could be mute and totally changed in the next few hours. So let's get it out there as fast as we can.
That is also the greatness of the NBA draft and the NBA in general. So I guess what are your feelings going tonight?
Well, a lot of uncertainty. I mean, it's the NBA draft. And so I read yesterday a quote from somebody talking about everything that executives say and agents say this time of year is lies. It's all lies. And we should accept that fact. So we don't know what's going to happen. I think we have a good sense of what's going to happen in the top 6. Beyond that, we got a lot of question marks, and certainly by the time we get to 21 when the Thunder drafts, no real sense of what's going to happen there. So who's going to be available? Is the Thunder going to keep the player that it drafts? Here's the one thing we know. Oklahoma City is going to pick a guy at 21. It can't trade that pick before then. So it's going to make a pick. Who it's going to be and what's going to happen after that is anybody's guess.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think it's also safe to say something is going to happen. I mean, Sam Presti generally doesn't let opportunities to make roster moves come and go without doing something. And I think beyond just what happens with the draft pick. I mean, I think we're going to see something happen. I don't know if it's going to be big. I don't know that the Thunder has the option to really do anything big, but I do think they'll make a move as they try to continue to build around Russell Westbrook, continue to try to maximize this time frame of his prime that he's in. But, you know, try to guess what Sam Presti's going to do, to me that feels almost foolish because this guy has been so creative on draft day that it just doesn't feel like it's worth even, you know, exerting the mental energy because you're not going to come up with what he's going to do.
Right. Reports surfaced earlier this week. Porzingis is probably on the block in New York City for not showing up to, I guess, his exit interview, which is beyond nuts. Phil Jackson, great coach, maybe not so good at this other part. He's was linked to Oklahoma City in a way. They said Oklahoma City was being talked about. Sam Presti loved him coming out of in the draft a few years ago. Any possibility of this happening?
Almost no possibility. I mean, almost none. I think if you're the Thunder, there's a reason that you'd want to have the conversation, and that is that Presti, well, above and beyond anything else, Porzingis is awesome. But Presti really likes Porzingis. There were some reports that maybe they had promised him in the 2014 draft when they were drafting 21st and 29th. He was less highly regarded then, probably still wouldn't have gotten to 21. He ended up pulling out of that draft anyway. He went into the 2015 draft, of course, where the Knicks took him 4th. The problem here, above and beyond everything, is that what the Knicks appear to be asking for, according to reports, is they want a rookie salary player like Porzingis, a really high-level player who's on a controllable salary, and a very high pick. So it was a weird thing to see the report yesterday that the Knicks had talked to the teams that had the top 5 picks in the draft and the Thunder. That was the one team that was kind of the outlier. Oklahoma City doesn't really have anything along those lines. I mean, you know, there's been some hang-up about could they get Devin Booker in addition to the 4 pick. That's a massive haul you're talking about for a guy who's worth a haul similar to that. And Oklahoma City doesn't have anything in that neighborhood. The one thing maybe if I'm Phil Jackson, maybe my conversation with the Thunder begins and ends with how interested are you in making a move that includes Russell Westbrook?
Yeah, and I don't really think that's going to happen.
No.
You know, the comment or the sort of the phraseology I saw attached to the Thunder, you know, not seriously being in the Porzingis conversation was they didn't have enough. And to me, that says they weren't offering Russell Westbrook. I mean, you know, I think that if there comes a time when the Thunder doesn't feel like he's here long term, you know, then we start talking potentially trade. But I just don't know that time has arrived yet. You know, obviously he's still under contract for another year. I would think that, you know, they want to see what happens July 1st when he has a chance to sign that extension that would add 5 years to his contract. You know, and maybe they've got some assurances one way or another from Westbrook, but I think I would let things play out a little longer before I would offer that. And frankly, if you're going to get Porzingis, and it doesn't make sense in my mind, Brett, to trade away your guy that would pair with him. I mean, we've talked about this emergence of the super teams, and if you're going to contend, you're going to need a couple of these guys. And if you're going to give away one to get one, to me that doesn't make a ton of sense.
Trading away the MVP, usually never a good idea, it seems like.
doesn't compute, really.
If you can get Kristaps Porzingis in the deal, it would soften the blow. But I'm with Jenny. I don't think we're anywhere close to that point yet. It would have to be a situation where Westbrook is not coming back. And above and beyond that, I think the Knicks would need some assurances that not only was Westbrook committed, but was committed to signing that contract, not the same contract, he can't sign it with somebody else, but was committed to signing long-term in New York. You're not going to give up Kristaps Porzingis for anything less than something that you can control for some period of time.
But doesn't this whole conversation about Porzingis, to me, this says a lot about just the fact that you never know exactly what teams might want to do. I mean, a year ago, we had no clue that Serge Ibaka was on his way out and that Orlando was willing to give up what they gave up. And I think this is just a reminder to me that, you know, we've obviously talked about Jimmy Butler. We've obviously talked about, you know, Paul George, these guys that have been talking about trades or moves or free agency. But then stuff like this pops up and, you know, the Knicks, they've been the Knicks and they continue to be the Knicks, you know, as it relates to what are we doing, how are we building. There's not really a sense that they understand what they need to do. But there are a lot of other teams like that with really talented players. So to think that, you know, nothing's going to happen because the Thunder isn't mentioned with, you know, all of these other deals going on, I think that's foolhardy because oftentimes we don't know what Sam Presti and the Thunder's going to do until they pull the trigger.
Eric, you and Brett, Brett, you and Eric,
other guy,
you know, broke down most of the possibilities for the Thunder at number 21. A lot has changed here and there since then with possibilities of guys rising and falling. Do you still think any of the guys you broke down are a possibility at number 21?
There's certainly possibilities. Now, I think even going into this, we knew 10 players when you're drafting 21st. That is a fragment of the possibilities that exist because some guys are going to rise. They're going to be off the board sooner than you think. Some guys are going to fall and not really be as appealing at 21 as you might think they were, 10 days ago when you set the list. So, you know, Luke Kennard is a perfect example. He was kind of a hot guy at 21 for a while. There were some mock drafts going that direction. Now almost everybody expects him to be going in the lottery. You know, a guy like Shemi Ojeleye, he's all over the board. There's no telling where he's going to be. I still think there's a great chance that they take a guy like a TJ Leaf. They take one of those big skilled power forwards because the position is so strong at that point in the draft. But I think some of the guys we thought might be there probably won't. Some of the guys we thought they might be interested in, we don't know if they are. I would say we got a 50-50 shot of getting one of those 10 guys being the guy. You know, we talked at the very open about that people lie this time of year, that we don't know what's going on. You know, just yesterday there were reports that Terrence Ferguson, a guy that there's some degree of interest, whether he's actually worked out here or whether the Thunder has seen him somewhere else, there is some degree of interest there. He canceled some workouts, and there were reports that maybe he had an assurance that he was going to a specific place and he no longer needed to work out. There were also some suggestions that maybe his workouts have been very poor. He didn't want to give teams another chance to see it. That's exactly what you're dealing with this time of year. It's two sides of every story, and you don't know which side is, you know, the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
He, to me, is so interesting because, you know, you read his skill set. You know, he's a wing guy who can shoot it. Sounds like he could play a little defense, but he's so unknown. I mean, he played high school ball here and then had I guess an academic issue. He was involved. I think didn't we uncover, Adam? He was involved with the Deion Sanders.
Deion Sanders, yeah, prep school.
Yeah, and so he had a grade issue. He ends up not getting into college, goes overseas. Now, I'll say from my perspective as a young guy, for him to go overseas and get himself back to the NBA draft and to be talked about as a first-round pick, to me that's impressive because a lot of times guys go overseas and you never hear from them again. You know, they either fall off or they just, you know, don't make it and that doesn't work. So the fact that he was able to navigate being overseas, playing overseas, regardless of the results, to me that says something about his maturity level. But you don't know. I mean, like, how much was he challenged in Australia? How much was he really developed there? Was that a good year? Was that a lost year? Where's he going to be basketball-wise once he hits, you know, summer workouts with whatever team drafts him? So a lot of unknown. It's intriguing, but it's also got to be a little bit scary for teams looking at this guy going, how much could he contribute right away?
Right. NBA salary cap, it has been expanding over the past couple of years, rising every year. This coming year, though, they announced that $3 million less than expected. How does that affect the Thunder?
Well, for starters, it's the Warriors' fault. So if you want to blame the Warriors for stuff, you can keep on blaming the Warriors. Part of the reason why this cap is $3 million less than expected is there were just so few playoff games. There were fewer games and fewer games in meaningful rounds in particular. That's very important. The weighted games, the later round games were not as, there just weren't as many. That impacts revenue, and revenue impacts the salary cap. It's going to affect the Thunder somewhat. The Thunder's kind of a strange team in the sense that, like, you might say, well, they're over the cap one way or the other, right? And that's true. They were over at 101 or 102. They're going to be over at 99. The thing is, they're inching closer and closer to the tax line now, and you don't want to pay the tax. The Thunder's not going to pay the tax. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be over that tax line to start the season, because you can make a trade during the season that gets you under the tax. The tax number is what you are at the end of the year, not what you are at the beginning, not what you are at the middle. But it does make things a little tricky. If you want to re-sign Andre Robertson, maybe that number that you have to play with now is a little bit lower. I think it makes even more unlikely something that was already unlikely, which is re-signing both Robertson and Taj Gibson. I don't think there's really much chance at all that's going to happen, barring some major move somewhere else that frees up a lot of space. Enes Kanter out for not much salary back, for example. But it definitely is going to affect the books just in terms of trying to stay away from that tax line.
I think the one thing, and I agree, I think you're probably in a situation where you can't re-sign both Robertson and Gibson, but the thing to remember is that, you know, the Thunder isn't the only one facing this reduction in the salary cap. So everybody around the league, while we saw this gigantic explosion of these contracts where we all kind of went, wait, what? You know, within the last couple of years, now everybody's going to be looking at it and saying, well, maybe where we were going to offer $15 million before, maybe now we got to back it up to 11, or, you know, they're going to all have to play with the math to some degree. So maybe that money that an Andre Robertson was hoping to get out on the market this year, and maybe it's just not going to be what he had hoped for, and maybe he'll look at it and say, man, I wish I would have done that deal with the Thunder back during the regular season when I had that opportunity. So, you know, I don't know how it's going to impact these individual guys, but I think it is going to impact the Thunder. But all of these salaries, you're not going to sort of see the monopoly money numbers that we've seen for a couple years.
Is this just another indictment on super teams in the NBA, that the NBA might need to, hey, we're losing money because of these things?
Adam Silver says, just get as good as those guys. Why can't you just be more like them? You know, like, why? It's like when you got an older brother who's doing well in school. Why can't you be more like that guy?
Does that just seem untenable? I mean, it seems like it can't. That's a structure that can't be upheld for very long. Now, does it sound good in theory to have a bunch of really good teams that people want to watch, like 6 or whatever? Yeah. But what happens to the other 24, 26 teams in the league? That just doesn't seem sustainable to me, Brett.
Yeah, it's always, the NBA's never had great parity. It's always been a league where, you know, 6 or 8 teams have won the bulk of the championships over 30 years. You look at LA, Boston, the Spurs, Chicago, now the Golden State Warriors, and then there was the Rockets period. So it's always kind of been this way. There's never been great parity. But, yeah, I think the thing is you've always got to believe that you have a fighting chance. And you've got to, more than that, you got to believe somebody can beat that team. And when you have a team like the Warriors where it doesn't feel like anybody has a chance to beat them, I think having 2 or 3 more would be great. It's good for the league just in the sense that you could at least see somebody have to get over a hump. The Warriors right now don't feel like they have a real challenger. So 1 or 2 more of these teams wouldn't be bad, but the league would much rather have you know, a better product 1 through 30 if it could have it.
I'm trying to think of what else we should talk about, guys. I guess tonight just feels like possibilities are endless for things that could happen, and it feels kind of like a crazy night. Is there something that we're talking about right now that could be irrelevant by tomorrow morning?
Well, all the guys who are at 21 could be irrelevant because it could be that the Thunder's drafting one of those guys for somebody else. That's always a possibility. You know, I think the one thing that people should take note of going into tonight, you know, Bleacher Report did this study yesterday, big, expansive study of basically how draft picks should perform based on where they're drafted and what general manager does the best job of finding the guys who match up most closely with what they're supposed to be or exceed what they're supposed to be at that pick. Sam Presti, it was overwhelmingly #1. It's not even close. Now, you can argue, well, he should have held on to some more of those guys. He should have held on to James Harden and Kevin Durant and Serge Ibaka or whoever. But he found those guys, and it's not just as easy as picking high. He did great picking high. He's done great picking in the middle of the draft. He's done pretty well in the 20s. He's had some hits and misses like everybody does. So I think the Thunder goes into this in good position in terms of who is making the selection. But you're right, anything could happen. That pick could be going somewhere else. We could see Enes Kanter on the move. There's been no indication that that's going to happen. But the one thing I think too, to the idea that there could be some movement tonight, we haven't heard much about it. Look at the last 3 major Thunder moves. Serge Ibaka going out when Jeremy Grant came in, the trade deadline deal for Doug McDermott and Taj Gibson. Those weren't names that were flying around in the days leading up. Everything's kind of caught you off guard, and that's sort of the way Sam Presti operates.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too to think about, the Thunder at 21. Serge Ibaka was in that range. Reggie Jackson was in that range. Yeah, Sam Presti's had some picks at the lower end of the first round that haven't necessarily worked out, but you wonder, the Thunder is in such a new spot right now. I mean, for its first 8 years of existence in Oklahoma City, it was all about building and trying to get to that championship level, and everybody was sort of, somewhere in the stars were about the same age, and they were developing together. And now you've got such a different dynamic with Russell Westbrook being the centerpiece, and what are you going to do around Russell Westbrook? Our guys that are brought in, if they drafted, say, a guy like a Reggie Jackson who maybe wasn't heralded, but you thought, wow, this guy could be really good. Or James Harden's too high, but somebody, Serge Ibaka, somebody that could become a really good player. Is there time? Is there going to be time given to these guys? And should there be time? I mean, Russell Westbrook's not getting any younger. He's not going to be able to drive to the basket like a man with his hair on fire forever. So do you have to look at it different? Do you have to be more short-sighted? And how do you maximize Russell Westbrook? Those are questions that, frankly, Sam Presti gets paid way more than I do to try to get figured out. But to me, that's a real issue if you're the Thunder, because you might be able to draft somebody really good at that 21 spot. But are you in a position where you can say, man, let's see where this guy develops and how it goes in the next couple of years?
Right. All those answers and more, I guess we'll see if they're answered tonight. So for complete coverage of the NBA draft and more, visit newsok.com and check us out every day in the Oklahoman.